code, we added also a height to the form, which was, I was about to say, let's make it an even 70%. That's where we got cut off. And did we add anything else? We added a justify content. But for now, I want to just add, I want to like increase the font size. So what happens if we do that? Size. Say like, it's not picking up the inputs. So I'll need to get into an input. Box form input. Might have to specify a text type. Let's refresh the page. That's what we're working with. And yeah, so we did distribute the content. That's fine. Let's go to an actual input. We want it for all types here. Input, Fox form input. Font size. Trying to be. That looks pretty good. 20 pixels. I like that. So we'll say font size is 20 pixels. Enough. And now we can make a little more meaningful decisions about how to distribute the content. So we go back to the form, we still have a Flexbox, and now we can go back to justify content and cycle through and see what we like. So we have centered, space around, space between. At this point, I actually think we could go back to higher, like taking up all of the space in the container. So let's say, what does 90 look like? Yeah, not so bad. So we'll say justify, bring this to 90. We'll say justify content space dash around. Now I forget. Justify content space dash around. Justify content. Cool. So I've refreshed here. See our changes reflected. The form field, so the inputs are like a little too wide, I think. So we can select that input. Let's say the width on these is like 90% of the container. And now we'll be able to get into a cool. We can see a little more of the power of Flexbox. So we're going to set that width, and let's make it. Let's just make it 90. That's fine. So, 90%. Now we can actually, with that in play, if we go back to the form, we can look at align items. So justify content distributes remaining space along the main axis. So right now the main axis would be top to bottom, kind of a y-axis. And align items defines where we actually position the content on the cross-axis. So in this case, left to right. By default, it's going to go flex start. So there's what we originally have. Flex end goes to the end, and center obviously would go to the center. So like super easy management of like where we want those fields to show up. In this case, I think flex start is fine. Let's go ahead and maybe make the submit button smaller and justify to the right. So here we can say special type submit. That with the font size because that will inherit it. And one of the nice things is sometimes you'll see like submit buttons on the right side of the form is with Flexboxes, you can override the alignment. So each item is right now being aligned by like Flex Start by default. So everything's lining up to the left side of the form. But actually, we can align items with align self. There we go. And we can like put it wherever we want. In this case, we moved it to the end of the container. And it's a little funky, so let's maybe add some. This is because it's going to the very end. We don't have any padding or margin. So if I pop into the form, maybe I add some margin. I always have to toy with like other. Yeah, I think that's what I want with padding. So at this point, I would say maybe I do make, because the width of the forms are only 90%, I was kind of basically achieving what I was going for earlier by changing the width of these. But at this point, since I have some padding, let's say we make it 10% on the form. Padding or 10 pixels. 10 pixels, I can take off this width, or maybe make it 100% for the input. And we should have some better aligned buttons now. Cool. Why do we have some more on the left than on the right? Maybe we make the whole section of the box padding. So instead of just the form, I'm going to add some padding to the whole whole container. That looks a little more nicely spaced out. But yeah, so that's just like a kind of brief overview of how to bring together the Flexbox. And we could even give some like similar styling to that form as we have for the cards. That might look kind of nice, and that could just be one of the cubes. But I hope that was like a decent demonstration of some of the things you can do. Again, just to review, the properties you're working with, display flex is your keyword there. Flex direction decides, hey, are we looking at rows or columns? And justify content decides how to distribute the remaining space in the container. Align items decides where to align things on like its cross axis. So if we go back to our form here, we can say justify or align items. And again, if we cycle through, we can see it's like slightly moving since the width is pretty much most, or it's 100% of the container. We don't see a whole lot of movement. And the submit button, we have align self on it. So override the container's preference. So here it's defaulting to flex start, but we can center it. That looks kind of nice. We can put it on the end. That's flex start. It's the default. Stretch is interesting as a closing note, super random. What stretch does is it makes it so that final submit. No, maybe not. I thought stretch made it so that it took up the entire width, but just aligned itself to the start. It doesn't appear so. Anyway, I hope that was a somewhat helpful kind of example of how you can actually use Flexboxes on forms and get a really nice, lightweight control over your forms. You could real quickly add some like bootstrappy type. If we went into the forms, we could say border none, At that point, you can get some more custom. We have some rounded edges on the inputs, and things start to look real nice and custom, and we can start styling our button. But that's for another time. Thank you for listening. Hope this was helpful.